Now, let's talk about the Prime Minister's trip to China. He's come under pressure from at least one defence expert today, Peter Jennings, who wrote a piece in The Australian saying that the Prime Minister's cared more about trivial photo opportunities, joking about pandas and things, than a sober reflection of the real risks that China poses to security in the Indo-Pacific. It's quite a scathing piece. He also pointed out, like I did last night, that Albanese likes to say that phrase, cooperate where we can, disagree where we must, but that there really hasn't been much disagreeing going on at all. And according to James Paterson, we haven't heard any cabinet ministers at all make any criticisms of China, particularly their human rights abuses, whereas they were Penny Wong in particular was very vocal in opposition.
Yeah, look, Sharri, I mean, I will say that I do not have an issue with a Prime Minister of any stripe going and representing Australia's interests overseas. I think, a lot of the criticism of Anthony Albanese for his travel is a bit overcooked and partisan. But that said, I think there's a lot to be said here that China is absolutely playing Anthony Albanese off a break. They think that they have his number. They think that they have a Prime Minister here who wants to be different to Scott Morrison, less combative. They can give him some nice headlines. But ultimately, Sharri, this relationship we've known since that defector came out in 2005 and said that China's plan was to turn Australia into an economic and political vassal of Beijing. Well, we haven't seen anything to change that. The rhetoric may be toned down, but when you talk about all of this stuff with, we're going to have a more mature conversation, well, show me that. Show me the evidence of that mature conversation. I mean, are we standing up not just on human rights, but on Australians detained like Yang Hangjun? It's great that Cheng Lei is out, but what about Australians who've been detained in Hong Kong? This is just the tip of the iceberg before we get to economic bullying, COVID, and a whole lot of other issues too.
Yeah, not to mention, I know you say COVID, but not to mention the origins of the virus.
This is what I mean.
Albanese didn't ask President Xi Jinping about that, even though it's killed millions of people, shut down our economy. Now, James, an area you follow very closely, Donald Trump gave quite a fiery appearance in court today. He came up against Letitia James. Look, I want to ask your assessment of this case, and I speak to Sean Spicer, Trump's former press secretary, about it a bit later in the show. But clearly the Democrats Letitia James has made it clear she was always going to, she was out to get him. But does that mean that there's no basis to this case? What's your view?
I think when it comes to this case, Sharri, and I mean, I know people might say, oh, well, You've supported Trump in the past, so you're going to say this, but I think that this case is the one that is the most nonsensical. I mean, first of all, put aside the fact that it's not a criminal case. What they're accusing him of here is a fraud where he allegedly inflated assets to get loans. But, if you're going to have a fraud, then you've got to have a victim. All of those loans were paid back. So, just on that very nature, the whole thing seems to be very much about a show trial, about trying to shut down the Trump business. And so many of these trials really do look like they're being driven by political prosecutors like Letitia James, who say, I'm coming in because I want to get Donald Trump one way or the other. It's Les Miserables, it's Javert, it's that whole thing. It's Beria from the Soviet Union. Show me the man and I'll show you the crime. And I think Americans in general are rebelling against what they perceive as a fundamental unfairness in the use of the justice system for political purposes. I mean, they're trying to bankrupt and jail an opposition leader because they don't like what they say. This is not what should happen in America, and I think the polls are showing that Americans aren't buying this effort. And really, the Democrats ought to just shut up and try and run a proper campaign against him, on the stump rather than in the courts.